Advance and be recognized, everyone, and welcome to the Sitrep podcast, your forward operations space for all things military and historical wargaming. I am your host, Oriskany Jim, and today we're back to finish up our wargaming scenario, where we're taking some vaguely educated guesses at what armored combat might look like in the near future for the British Army. Our system, once again, is Panzer Leader by Avalon Hill, updated for the modern era with various expansions like the Arab-Israeli Wars and Tactical Combat Middle East by Toshash Miniatures. The scenario postulates a situation which, of course, we hope we never see. Sometime in the near future, say 2028 or 2030, we're imagining the Russians making a push into the Baltic states. Now, as you may know, as part of NATO's Enhanced Forward Presence Program and Operation Cabret, Great Britain has had a battalion of tanks and armored infantry in the country of Estonia since 2016. Now these units, including elements of the King's Royal Hussars and the Yorkshire Regiment, find themselves part of a NATO Article 5 response, as lead elements of the Russian 27th Motor Rifle Brigade 1st Guards Tank Army come charging across northern Estonia, and as they do so, they find themselves checked by a counter-advance by these British units. Part of the idea for this scenario was to take some educated guesses at how current programs for future British armored vehicles might look in potential future armored conflicts. This is going to include new equipment like the Ares armored infantry vehicle, the Boxer mechanized infantry vehicle, the Ajax combat reconnaissance vehicle, and the Challenger 3 main battle tank. Now, please note, the game values for these new units have been drawn from the most recent declassified technical data that I've been able to find, so I admit I'm working with some pretty incomplete information here. Also, how these new vehicles and units might slot into future British tables of organization and equipment or orders of battle is subject to change at the MOD. In short, we aren't exactly working with the crystal ball here, and we're doing the best we can. Also, this is a brand new Panzer Leader force on its first time out, so a lot of the support assets like drones, attack helicopters, fixed-wing airstrikes, and off-board artillery aren't being included. This is just a small part of a larger British Combined Arms battle group set up in kind of a playtest pickup game. So far, the British are holding, sort of. I mean, they did come on the table first. They seized most of the key terrain, set up a good defensive position, and dared the Russians to come at them.
Alright, you bastards! Come and have a go if you think you're hard enough!
And the Russians certainly did, but they didn't come straight down the field. Rather, they gathered most of their heavy armor strength in a wide flanking maneuver around the north, largely bypassing the British left and forcing the British to scramble a little bit in response. The Russians are positively engulfing the battlefield objectives up in this part of the table, forcing the British to either give up these objective X's or stand and take unacceptable damage to overwhelming point-blank fire. We're talking about Russian tanks outnumbering the British by 6-1 at ranges as short as 150 meters. At that range, my friends, even Russian tank gunners don't miss, and those 125mm smoothbores will go through a Challenger just fine. But this tactic is costing the Russians plenty. Already we see at least 12 armored fighting vehicles burning across the battlefield, and a whole platoon of conscript infantry has already been shot off the field. Can the British keep their very, very limited forces intact long enough to bleed the Russians white? Or are the Russians going to be able to finally crush the British off some of these objective hexes and force some kind of ham-fisted victory? Let's head over to the footage and find out. I told you this battle in the south wasn't over yet. We're now into the Russian turn, and they're going to open fire with these two platoons of MTBMP2s. They do have 30mm autocannon, and they're going to engage this Ares. So that's going to be actually 16 and 16 make 32 versus 10. So again, 3-1, add 1 to the die roll. A 2 plus 1 becomes a 3 on the 3-1 table. We have our first British unit destroyed, folks. Okay, so with that taken care of, we then go to Russian movement phase, at least on this part of the battlefield. Like I said, they're going to drive in there with that second platoon, actually the third platoon of conscript infantry. And now they face, again, more British opportunity fire. Again, we're looking at 28 and 6 makes, oh, my math is terrible, 34. 5-1. I don't want to engage 2. That knocks me down to 2 to 1. 5 to 1, add 1 to the die roll. Let's see if we can knock down some more Russian conscripts. That is a 2. That's going to easily get it done. So they still hold the objective X. They can defend it for a while, but they might knock out those snipers and scouts, but they're not going to do anything against those challengers. I can promise you that. Up here to the north, the Russians continue to exert some pretty harsh pressure. We're going to begin with the fire phase, and it's going to be these 2 platoons, one of BMP-2s, one of BTR-82s. They have a line of sight at, again, very close range, and they are going to engage that platoon of empty Boxer IFVs that's in there, or technically MIVs. Do notice, however, that these British are in concrete buildings, so they're using the Arab-Israeli Wars building or urban hex rule, where you get to add 5 to the defense. So even though his defense is 8, it's read as 13. Both of these attack factors, however, do double because they are within a short range bracket. So we're looking at 2 16s here actually. That's going to be 32 versus 13. That's going to be a 2 to 1 attack. Now the Russians also do have to add 1 to the die roll. A 1. Holy crap. Okay, the British have lost another unit. Oh man. Okay, so he's rolled out of there. And then that's when all of this movement happens. Again, you shoot first in Panzer Leader and then you move. So all of these other Russian units then execute this movement here. Alright, so on turn 5, Russian turn 5, what we're going to see is a pincer, sort of a close assault between the conscript infantry and this heavy weapons platoon. It's probably not going to be enough, but maybe after some of these tanks chew down what's in there, I mean, you never know. So once again, the British are going to try and shoot their way out of this trap. The first thing that's going to happen is Challenger 3, the full platoon, is going to fire his 112 points up here. Again, I want to shoot it at 2 platoons, but that's going to be just too poor of a chance to actually do anything good. So I'm going to restrict myself to 1 platoon. They're going to carefully select their targets. Is 112 versus 20. 5 to 1. I do have to add 1 to my die roll though, because the Russians are in trees. So we have a copy of the combat results table there. Again, I'm on the 5 to 1 row. An X kills, but I have to add 1 to my die roll. Alright, so a 2 becomes a 3. That is another platoon T. We're wearing them down. The Russians are paying a really high price for this real estate. And then he's going to have to go ahead and bug out of there. So, I mean, if he stays, he's going to get slaughtered from 2 sides. Again, 3 64s, that is 192 versus 36. That's not going to fly. So he is going to give up this objective X, I'm sorry to say. Now, this rifle platoon has 2 choices. He can either close assault this guy here, but then he's kind of stuck there. Or he can back up a little bit and close assault this way. The problem there is that he is moving more than a quarter of his movement rate in enemy line of sight. Enemy line of sight being, of course, that T-72 platoon. So he's going to try and do the smart thing. He's going to back up and then sort of close assault here against those T-72s. Because if he stays there and close assaults, he is literally dead. That does mean he's going to take opportunity fire from this T-72 platoon here. So that is going to be 32 against 8, although the Russians don't have an A-star on there. Yeah, they don't have good anti-infantry ammunition. So that's going to be just 32 divided by 2 is 16 against 8 plus 5 for concrete buildings. It's going to be a 1-to-1 attack. And the Russians have to add 1 to their die roll. So actually, that infantry platoon might get away with this. Yeah, 5 plus 1 is 6. Notice that is no effect. So this close assault is now going in. 8 versus 20. Actually, that 8 is going to triple. So that's going to be 24 versus 20. The British, however, do have to add 1 to the die roll. So it's going to be 1 to 1, subtract 2, add 1. So it's 1 to 1 minus 1 for the British. Holy crap, they did it. Alright, so 1 minus 1 on the 1-to-1 table is a 0. They just took out a platoon of... yeah, those are the in-laws right there, buddy. It just happened. We just saw it. And they were able to destroy that platoon of T-72s. Check that out. The bad news is that they now have given up that position. The Russians on their turn are going to go ahead and move in and take it. Actually, we're going to have the infantry do it, because infantry do really well at getting dug out of concrete buildings there. There is a wreck counter in there, so I can't put 3 infantry units in there. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and put another infantry unit in there. And now that hex is maximum stacked, because that's the whole point of wreck counters. Wreck counters do count towards stacking limits. So yeah, the Russians have taken that objective hex. They now have 2 objective hexes, at least for the moment. They're 1 more objective hex from technically winning the game. But meanwhile, the Russians have 2 other objective hexes under threat. Yes, that BTR-82 platoon that was carrying the Russian heavy weapons section has managed to move far enough around this Ajax CRV to avoid opportunity fire. But he is now threatening this objective hex, where the Lieutenant Colonel might actually have to put down the teacup and pick up that NLAWs. He is furiously reading that instruction training sticker on the side of that rocket tube. And he's like, how does this thing work again? I never thought I was actually going to have to use one of these. So he's going to go ahead and fire now. I don't really like their chances. There's a grand total of 3. Again, I-class weapons are able to be fired against armored targets at ranges of 1 or 2 per Arab-Israeli war rules. So we're talking at 5 versus 8. That's 1 to 2 odds. And on top of that, the British have to add 1 to the die roll because the Russians are in wooden buildings. So not great, but they might pin them down. A 6, they didn't do squat, man. Hey, Lieutenant Colonel, point the NLAW, you've got it back to front, man. He just shot the rocket the wrong way. So yeah, that didn't go well. Last but not least, the Russians are also threatening the British center, although not terribly effectively. The idea here was to stress test the British center and keep them stretched out as they had to deploy their heavier defensive assets out of their center to address those threats to the north and south. And when that happened, these 2 platoons of BMPs carrying mortar rifles moved against the center. It's not going so well for the Russians here. In fact, I do need to roll to rally those British. This will be their turn, though, if they succeed to rally. The British are morale A, so they rally on a 5 down. 6, holy crap, he fails. That's not good. The British will rally on a 1 through a 5, but sure enough, he rolls a 6. Okay, so that was his turn. So just on the center part of the battlefield, let's quickly make it over to the Russian turn. I'm going to try to rally those 2 units. They rally on a 1 through a 3 because they're morale C. The Russians are not as well put together as the British personnel. So first for the conscript infantry, he also fails, and nobody wants to fight in the center. And then the empty BMPs, the BMPs do rally, but that was their turn. All right, so disregard these 2 units here in the center. They're not able to help the Russians right now because, again, he's still dispersed, and this platoon, that was his turn to rally. The bad news, though, is these 2 who are in good order. So that actually should show as unloaded. They were unloaded last turn, so forgive me for that. And that means that 14 points is going to go into 8. That's still only 1 to 1, so never mind. I'm only going to put the autocannon in there. So A star 8 factors, so I don't have to divide, goes against 8, 1 to 1 odds. Add 1 to the die roll for buildings, subtract 1 from the die roll for being dispersed, and a double D will kill. So let's see what the Russians get here. Okay, a 2. That's probably not good news. On the 1 to 1 table, no modifiers. That is a double D. A double D will kill a dispersed unit. So never mind empty armored vehicles, light armored vehicles. We now have an actual British platoon kill. You know what I forgot to do? The British also get to shoot these mortars. So we have mortars on direct fire. In Arab-Israeli wars, that counts as double against soft targets. So that 6 is going to be read as a 12. 12 versus 6, that's 2 to 1 odds. He's in the open. Subtract 1 from the die roll because he's dispersed. He's in even worse shape. I'm now on this row right here, and we're going to be rolling and subtracting 1 from the die roll. And again, a double D will kill him. Basically, as long as I don't roll a 6, he's dead. So, hey, what do you know? The British mortars are going to get to take out some Russians after all. And yeah, a 2 easily gets it done. That 2 is read as a 1. On the 2-to-1 table, he is hella smoked. So we did lose a platoon there, and the British did lose a platoon there. Yeah, that little center battlefield is actually getting a little bloody after all. I spoke too soon as far as that goes. Okay, so one thing to look at the end of turn 5, just before we move on to turn 6, is that when the Russians moved down with this heavy weapons platoon and this conscript infantry platoon, that now puts them point blank next to 2 platoons of British tanks. They are in range to close assault. And again, remember how nasty close assaults can be. Dangerous enough when you're looking at just the conscript infantry, but also, yeah, you gotta watch out for the heavy weapons platoon. They don't triple, but it's very, very bad. We don't want to be there for that close assault. So the British are going to have to do something about it now. During the Russian phase of turn 5, they're going to have to fire off some opportunity fire. The good news is they have plenty of fire. 56 and 28, that's 84. Plus 8 for this infantry platoon gives them 92. Versus 6, versus 6, versus 5. Again, they are in concrete buildings, so you have to add 5 to their total. Is 17. That's still 5 to 1. So while the infantry are moving down there, these 2 platoons of Russian tanks are going to move there. The Russian tanks cannot move and shoot. You always shoot and then move. So the British are not under threat from those Russian tanks during Russian turn 5. They are under threat from those Russian infantry on turn 5. So they're going to have to shoot at the conscript and heavy weapons platoon first. Again, it's 5 to 1. They do have to add 1 because they are in concrete buildings. So 5 to 1, add 1 to the result. 4 plus 1 makes 5. That barely gets it done. But both of these platoons are now destroyed. And I'm afraid that's the end of the good news for the British, because again, they took their opportunity fire here. Yeah, the bad news is they have to leave, because again, now we're on British turn 6. They've already fired. Opportunity fire is basically you borrow against your next fire phase. So the British turn 6, they can't shoot. Move on to Russian turn 6. They're going to blast, and they're going to kill some of these challengers. So yeah, he's going to fall back here. Meanwhile, these Russians are going to go ahead and reoccupy that objective hex. Again, it's more destroyed Russian platoons. The Russians are pretty much smashed up, and now we've pretty much finished up turn 6. The game's almost over at this point. But yeah, it looks like the Russians are going to be holding on to at least one of these objective hexes. The end comes swiftly down here at the southern end of the battlefield, where the Russians have been steadily ground down. Notice they've lost their last dismounted platoon of motor rifles here in successive attempts to either disperse or destroy this scout platoon, sniper platoon. That went about as well as you would think. Yeah, the British are still standing and the Russians are not. Meanwhile, the scouts and snipers have been suppressing these BMP-2s with their 6 I-class attack factor, and finally the BMP-2 has failed a rally check. And of course that 2-tank section of Challenger 3s is about to ring the dinner bell on some BMP-2s. They really would probably just get the hell out of there at this point, but they are holding an objective hex, so let's just go ahead and wrap this up. So the Challenger 2 is going to destroy the BMP-2. It is a total of 56 versus 6. That is something like 9 to 1 odds. Add 1 to the die roll. Okay, guess what? That is going to be the end of that BMP-2. Again, BMP-2 versus Challengers at 150 meters. You do the math. That's going to be the end of that. Okay, the only reason those BMPs lasted as long as they did was those Challengers were trying to chew down dismounted infantry. Okay, now the reconnaissance and sniper platoon is going to close assault the disrupted BMPs. The BMPs do not get opportunity fire because they're disrupted. They're dispersed. They're pinned down. So it's going to be 6 against 6. Actually, that is an I-class weapon, so it's going to be 18 against 6. 3 to 1 odds. Subtract 2. Add 1 for Woods. Subtract 1 again for being dispersed. Yeah, 3 to 1 odds, subtracting 2 from the die roll, a double D will do it. I don't even think a dice roll is needed. At the end of the British phase, the Challenger tanks are going to use their split move and fire to occupy that objective hex and win that part of the battlefield for the British. We've got a little bit of drama where this rogue platoon of BTR-82s again, threatened the Lieutenant Colonel, and then the Lieutenant Colonel kind of whiffed his end-lawless attack. He didn't qual on the range this year. The BTR-82 then shot up his 2 command vehicles. That was pretty easy, but it did put another British kill on the table, I'm afraid. Okay, so to call in some reinforcements, what the British did was they first called in this Ajax combat reconnaissance platoon. Okay, so as they come swooping in, they do save the Colonel and the objective hex, but they did move, so they can't fire that turn. So then the BTR-82, who couldn't take opportunity fire because the Ajax was not in his line of sight for 1/4 of his movement rate, is now going to go ahead and take a shot at the Ajax. Fortunately, the Ajax has much thicker skin. Also, it's a 4-tank platoon, or would that actually be a troop in the British parlance? So the BTR-82 has an attack factor of 8. It's an A-class weapon, point-blank range, doubles to 16. However, it's 10, and I have to add 1 to the die roll because the British are in wooden buildings. So it's 1-to-1, add 1 to the die roll. The Russians will not be able to kill the Ajax, but they might suppress it with a 5, adjusted 5. They don't even manage to do that. Meanwhile, that headquarters section of Challengers is now here. So the captain is here to save the Lieutenant Colonel. And that's how far he managed to get during British turn 7. Yeah, that BTR-82, he had his shot. He damaged this objective hex. He scared the crap out of the British battalion commander, I promise you that. But it's not going to happen because he can't beat the Ajax platoon, much less the 2-tank command section of Challengers that are coming for him. So for the Russian turn 7, he's going to go ahead and use split movement fire to withdraw. Just get the hell out of there. So that objective hex is going to be safe for the British. Meanwhile, in the center, pretty sure this one's going to be safe as well. British turn 7. Let's try to rally those engineers. So the engineers try to come up and do a close assault. They caught opportunity fire from these BMPs. The conscript infantry actually caught mortar fire and were pinned down. So there's a little bit of a fracas in here. Let's see if those engineers can rally. They failed. What is up with that hex? Something horrifying is happening in that hex, because everybody who goes in that hex fails to rally. Look at that. Oh, I did not roll to see if those Russians were able to rally. Okay, the Russians were able to rally. They're just going to get shelled by these mortars again. That counts as 12 versus 6. Okay, so again, 2-to-1 odds, add 1 to the die roll. A 2 becomes a 3. That almost gets it done. This guy is going to fire into that BMP hex. So 6 versus 6. 1-to-1 odds, no modifiers. Come on, pin him down. 2, he pins him down. And that's going to clear the way for the game's probably one and only overrun attack. So these guys swing around. Although, crap, they're going to open up to opportunity fire from this guy. Damn it. Alright, 16 versus 10. Let's see if the Russians can slow this down a little bit. Ooh, with a 1, they actually kill somebody. Okay, that's me getting reckless with the British. And then 6 versus 6. 1-to-1, 2-to-1. Subtract 3 from the die roll. 2 for the overrun, 1 for being dispersed. So 2-to-1. Subtract 3 from the die roll. Oh god, and they roll a 1 anyway. Yeah, I got a little reckless there with the British, so I did lose another platoon there. Not so happy about that, but we did wreck some more Russian BMPs, and hopefully shut down the threat there against the British central objective hexes as well. Okay, let's go ahead and wrap this up. So again, the BTR has sort of beat feet out of here because again, this hex was no longer going to be under any kind of a threat. The British are then redeploying some of their heavier defensive units. The Ajax is here, and the 2-tank command section of 2 Challenger 3s is here. The Javelins have also deployed here. We're not going to make a push at the Russian position here because they're just too deeply entrenched in all those concrete buildings, but they are contained. If the Russians stick their head out from this little hedgehog of hexes, they are going to be in a world of hurt. In fact, when the full platoon of Challengers has pivoted back around this way, the original idea was to draw a bead on the BTRs that were beating up on this British infantry. The BTRs have now fallen back. Yeah, except now that's going to, open it up to this. Now, they took opportunity fire So on British turn 8, yeah, they're going to go ahead and open fire this way. Those units have been spotted many times, so yeah, there's no problems there. They're just going to engage the remaining BMP section in there. And yeah, I mean, I'm not even going to pick up the dice, because 112 for point blank range versus 6, what even is that? We're talking about 18 to 1 odds. Unless you roll a 19 on a 1d6, yeah, he's pretty much toast. So that's going to be some more burning Russian hardware there on the table. Then the British mortars are going to try and shell that position. So again, mortars at 12, machine guns at 6, that's 18. Another section of machine guns, that's going to be 24 versus 6, 4 to 1 odds. Add 1 to the die roll for the woods the Russians occupy, and a 1, he's hell smoked. Yeah, the Russians have been completely smashed in the center. Just for completeness sake, let's see if these engineers are able to rally. They failed again. What is going on in that hex? What is, like, Freddy Krueger is in that hex. Something horrifying is going on in that hex. The challengers that helped overrun the Russian southern objective hex has now doubled back just to help hold that center objective hex. No more problems there. The scouts and snipers are holding the southern objective hex. This hex never came under threat. Yeah, I mean, the Russians do get a turn here, but yeah, we're pretty much done. That's going to close out turn 8, and that is game. As we can see, the British did get beat up a little bit. They did lose 1 objective hex, and at least 2 others were put under momentary threat. In fact, 1 was taken. The British were just able to take it back. So at one point, the Russians held 2 objective hexes and had 2 others under threat. They kind of could have won this game, but the British were just too powerful. So nevertheless, the British did lose 4 platoons of armored vehicles, and they did lose 1 full platoon. So this battle wasn't free. The British do know they've been in a fight, but the kill ratio is completely out of whack. Yeah, the Russians have definitely lost. They only hold 1 objective hex out of 5. That makes the British the clear winners in today's scenario. So that's going to conclude today's game, and I hope you guys have enjoyed it. And there we have it, folks. I stacked the British up against some pretty serious Russian numbers, and I'll admit, I gave the Russians plenty of benefit of the doubt when it came to their combat values and the disposition of their forces. But in the end, old Blighty came out on top with a pretty solid British victory. Now, I did keep Russian units limited to their reduced combat values that I've been using based on what we've seen in the Ukraine war. This is especially true for the effectiveness of their armor-piercing ammunition and their complete lack of any effective reactive armor. But I did not limit the Russians to any special rules regarding their deployment, activation, or maneuver. So, if anything, an actual engagement like this would go even worse for the Russians. Needless to say, let's hope nothing like this actually happens. Games and conjecture are one thing, but I think we can all agree that the last thing the world needs is another friggin' war. And that's where we're going to leave it for now, folks. Thanks very much for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed this content. Please remember to hit that notification bell. Also, please consider joining the Sitrep Podcast Discord. There is an auto-accept invitation link to our Discord in the description of this video. Join our community, see what everybody's up to, and best of all, show us what's happening on your hobby table. But for now, this is Oriskini Jim with the Sitrep Podcast. We are rounds complete for another episode. And as always, Tango Mike for watching.